The night before my engagement, my girlfriend suggested we break up. She told me she fell for Edward, the new guy at work. Edward's the chairman's only son. Everyone knew he was just getting some grassroots experience. With tears in her eyes, she said, "We'd be struggling forever if we stayed together. Let me go, please." I forced a smile and agreed, but I didn't tell her the truth. I'm actually the real young master. The day Emily asked for a breakup, I was showing her the venue for our engagement party. She said she didn't like those surprise proposals, so we had to plan it together. She preferred blue roses, so I covered the whole venue with them. She liked unique background music, so I hired an orchestra. After I introduced everything, Emily paused, then looked up and said, "Nick, let's break up." I was confused. "Emily, are you kidding? We're about to get engaged." "Exactly, and that's why I have to tell you now. I'm in love with Edward. I can't hold you back anymore." I was taken aback but not shocked by this ending. "Do you really love him?" Emily smiled faintly. "Whether I really love him or not, does it matter? He buys me expensive bags, gets me a house and a car, and plans our engagement on an island. Can you give me these things? Love without material comfort is just a pile of sand. All you have are these worthless blue roses in this shabby venue." "Nick, love means letting go. If you love me, you should encourage me to pursue my true love." I managed a weak smile. Compared to Edward, I indeed couldn't offer Emily these things now. I wasn't blind to how things changed when Edward showed up. Emily and I started dating in our freshman year. After graduation, we both joined the same company. To avoid complications, we kept our relationship under wraps, pretending to be just colleagues. Years of encouragement and support brought us closer. It was like our souls intertwined. But with Edward's entrance, I felt Emily drifting away. Everyone knew Edward was the chairman's son, here to learn the ropes. Emily became his mentor. She worked late and traveled often. She explained it away by saying that we had to show our abilities to the chairman's son. He was a spoiled brat, different from me, who cared. But Emily couldn't hide that gentle smile every time Edward was mentioned. I stayed silent and accepted her words. Things changed further when her business trips ended. Emily started playing the game we used to, but now she didn't invite me. Curious, I checked and noticed I was no longer listed in her couple rankings. Her new username was related to Edward, and his account name referred to her. Checking my own ID, Listen to Me Farm, I remembered hers was Cheesecake. Once, she said it didn't matter because the name was cute, even though the game didn't need farming. I wondered if she remembered how it felt back then. Probably not. Emily sucked at games. She played just to accompany me. We both gave up playing when life got busy. Now, someone else had her attention, drawing her away from us. After she broke up with me, she left. The next day, I went through the motions of returning everything. I canceled the venue, returned the flowers, and called off the orchestra. The venue and orchestra were easy to manage with just a deposit. Dealing with the flower shop and the blue roses, though, was a headache. I spent a lot on those roses and had to cover the cost since they couldn't be resold. The shop owner, upon hearing it was because of a breakup, agreed to let me buy just a third. I sent those to Emily. She always loved blue roses. This was the last time I could gift her. To my surprise, Emily showed up, threw a bunch of those blue roses in my face and said, "Nick, if we're broken up, let's keep it classy. What's the point of clinging like this?" The thorns scratched my face, burning like her words, like a slap to my face. I smiled bitterly. "Emily, I'm not trying to cling. It was just my last gift to you. I don't need useless flowers. They're just taking up space. Stop doing useless things." Looking at her cold expression, it felt like my voice was being strangled, unable to make a sound. Love and the lack of it are really obvious. In sophomore year, on our first anniversary, I bought her flowers. We both came from humble backgrounds, and a bouquet was as much as I could afford after delivering food in the cold for 3 nights. Emily, holding the flowers, looked at me with tears, complaining that I wasted my precious time. I just smiled and patted her head, saying, "As long as it makes you happy, it's not wasted." She took the flowers back to her dorm and cared for them for days until they withered. She cried, saying it was the first bouquet I gave her, and she couldn't bear to let go. I held her softly, comforting her. "It's fine if it withers," I said. "I'll buy you more later." Emily's eyes lit up. She quickly wiped her tears away. "You said it. If you don't keep your promise, I won't let you off." Back then, her eyes were full of hope for our future. Looking back, we had such loving moments. But now, she'd complain these flowers are just in the way. Seeing the sharpness in her eyes now, it struck me how things have changed between us. I picked up the bouquet from the floor. The blue roses looked awfully defeated. In that instant, I understood why Emily was upset to see the flowers wither back then. Emily and I are like these flowers, unable to go back to where we were. For this engagement, I took a vacation from work, planning to announce our relationship a couple of days beforehand and invite colleagues to celebrate. Plans never seemed to keep up with changes. We broke up, no engagement party needed. I used my vacation days to rest at home. The night before returning to work, Emily texted me to pick up my stuff from her place. When I got there, Edward was around. Both were on the couch playing video games. Emily called for help in the game. "Come save me." Perhaps Edward didn't make it in time, and she exclaimed in frustration, "Avenge me, Edward." "Say no more," he replied instantly. Then Emily praised him. "Wow, you're amazing." I cleared my throat awkwardly. Emily turned, saw me at the door, and her smile vanished. "It's all set for you on the coffee table," she pointed out. Edward glanced at me indifferently. "So this is your broke boyfriend?" Emily pretended to be angry, nudging him slightly, "Ex-boyfriend." I didn't reply, silently checked the box of my things. Nothing was really worth taking. Whether everything was there or not, it didn't matter anymore. I handed the keys back to Emily, lifting the box to leave. She added, "And this too," pointing to a journal on the table. This journal was something we made together, filled with 8 years of memories. Emily clearly didn't want it. I hesitated for a moment, cherishing those memories, and reached for it. Edward casually had his foot on it, lounging comfortably. I said, "Edward, your foot's on my stuff." Edward acted like he just realized. "Oh, it's Nick, isn't it?" He lowered his foot. "Sorry, didn't notice." With that, he casually flipped through the journal. "Wow, Nick can do this crafty stuff." He glanced at Emily. "Do you like it?" Emily said teasingly, "Who'd like such a cheap thing?" "That's a relief. I was worried you'd appreciate such low-grade gifts." He tossed the journal into the box, playfully tapped Emily's nose. Emily giggled in his arms. I took a deep breath, reeling from how much Emily had changed. I thought for a second, then said, "Emily, can we talk?" She followed me into the hallway, leaning against the wall impatiently. "Make it quick. Don't want my boyfriend misinterpreting anything." I asked her, "Emily, do you love Edward for who he is, or because he's the chairman's son?" The hallway was dim, nearly obscuring her features. From the shy, delicate girl who accepted my confession with a blush, she now wore none of that innocence. The world's harsh realities smoothed her edges, leaving only a grown-up's materialistic scent. She met my gaze. "Does it matter? Edward and being the chairman's son, both are him." I chuckled softly, unwilling to see her make choices she might regret. I reminded her, "What if he wasn't the chairman's son?" Emily didn't entertain the hypothetical. "Nick, life's not full of what-ifs. We're over. You can't give me what I need. I don't regret today's choice. Please let me go." Let go. I couldn't believe such a term came from Emily. Though we shared similar backgrounds, our struggle to find footing in the city was intense. Her youth was almost all spent on me. Every late night working, I reminded myself I must not let Emily down. And now, she tells me to just let go. I smiled lightly. "Got it. Wish you a bright future and all the best." I left Emily's place with my belongings, leaving unsaid that Edward isn't the biological son of the chairman. That position belongs to me. You've unlocked an alternative ending. Ken reached out to me months before. Imagine a stranger claiming to be your dad. Most would think it's a scam, but DNA tests don't lie. From Ken, I heard a story unknown to me. My mom passed away giving birth, and amidst chaos, I was switched, unknowingly raised by another family. Ken unknowingly raised another son for over 20 years. By chance, he discovered the switch and spent years searching for me. I grew up in the countryside under the care of others, never knowing my biological origins. I thought I was alone in this world, only to learn fate had played a trick. I had family. Ken asked me to come home, but I refused. I needed time to process the stranger as my father, and going back would create tension with Edward, his raised son. Edward grew up knowing luxury, a typical rich kid. For me to take his place would upset him. Ken understood my hesitations. Edward's been under my roof for over 2 decades. Even if it were a pet, feelings grow. I can't just kick him out. But Nick, your family. I owe you and your mother for the years lost. Our business needs management. If you and Edward could work together, that'd be my wish. Therefore, Ken decided to. First, they didn't take me back. Instead, they sent Edward to the branch office for some training. If he's got the chops, maybe he can help me run the business in the future. If not, well, he can just chill and live comfortably at home. Once Edward arrived at the branch office, his project work was mediocre. His only noticeable achievement might have been stealing my girl. After my breakup with Emily, I didn't have time for lament. We work at the same company, so we can't avoid each other. When vacation ended, the first thing I saw when I got to the office building was Emily holding Edward's hand, surrounded by colleagues jeering playfully. She wore a bashful smile while Edward patted her on the head. They looked like a picture-perfect couple, which caught everyone's attention. The moment I stepped into the office, I overheard the gossip about Edward and Emily. When Emily and I were together, she was worried about our office romance causing a stir, even asked me to keep it quiet. But she doesn't seem worried about it now. As soon as I reached my desk, Mike waved me over and said, "Nick, finally, you're back. Did you hear? The boss wants us to get the project done with the young master involved." I figured he's here to learn the ropes, right? Working with us makes sense. Mike looked at me like I just didn't get it. "Nick," he sighed, "this time the boss wants you to lead. You've been here for years and you've finally got a lead role. But shoving Edward into the project means you're just playing second fiddle. Everyone knows Edward is Ken's son. It's no secret. They say he's here to learn, but who's actually teaching him? Edward tagging along means the credit lands on him. No wonder Mike is so frustrated. I reassured him it's all good. We'll focus on our jobs, and no one can take that away from us. Mike sighed again. Before long, the boss called us in for a meeting to assign tasks for the project. Edward and Emily both had their own parts to take care of. To land this big contract, everyone on the team started putting in late hours. But while we were hustling to contact clients, Edward and Emily took time off for dates. When we stayed up late working on plans, they were in their own little world. We burned the midnight oil for weeks, and Edward returned from a vacation with Emily. After sealing the deal, the company held a recognition meeting, where the boss praised Edward and Emily for their leadership, saying we should applaud them. Edward's reputation shot up at the branch office. People acknowledged him for leading a significant project, and staff from other branches even came to learn from him. Mike closed the office door and ranted about Edward's nerve. I chuckled, giving him a reassuring pat and a cold beer to ease his frustration. When Emily showed up at the office to talk to me, I was caught off guard. Since we broke up, we barely exchanged words at work, which was just fine by me. After 8 years together, even though things ended this way, I couldn't bring myself to hate her. But it's hard to chat casually like ordinary colleagues. Emily stood by my desk, looking stunning. She seemed to be doing well, but her tone was unusually sharp. "Nick, if I were you, I'd quit." I asked her why, and Emily took a deep breath, unclear if it was a threat or advice. "You have talent. At another company, you could start fresh. Staying here, your presence will just make Edward more annoyed with you. Joining their family, I need to have something substantial. This project was supposed to be my stepping stone. Just help me this one last time, okay?" I didn't know what turned Emily like this. Maybe the 7-year itch took its toll on our love, but she wasn't supposed to be this calculating. The girl who once encouraged me is gone. I sighed deeply. Emily, I'm not leaving. Emily glared, you'll regret it. It didn't take long for Emily to show me why she said that. One quiet evening, Edward posted on social media, accusing a company employee of sexually harassing his girlfriend, providing chat screenshots as proof. Everything pointed at me, igniting an angry storm in the comments. I thought he was nice, didn't expect him to be this gross, trying to hit on Edward's girl. Like, really? Even Emily's friends at work sent me nasty messages. I ignored them all. The company has its own procedures, and without wrongdoing, even Edward can't get me kicked out. The harassment claim was baseless, a ploy to make me leave on my own. Thanks to them, everyone looked at me differently. The female colleague next to me even asked to change desks. Mike was the only one who believed me. He said, "They wronged you. Fight back." But I kept my cool. Then Edward confronted me. I was making tea when he came over with his coffee. Emily's taste wasn't great before. Falling for someone like you, he mocked. I took a sip of my tea and calmly replied, "Yet here you are, taking advantage of my hard work." Edward's expression turned dark before he collected himself. "You still don't get it," he continued. "You might be clever and capable, but you'll always work for me. That's just the way it is. Our fates were sealed since birth. You're just an employee. If you were smart, you'd quit now. Otherwise, I can make sure you're blacklisted in this industry." Though Edward was shorter than me, the guy looks alright except when he uses force or bribes. Then he looks really ugly. Ken is supposed to be a refined businessman, but somehow he didn't pick up a single good trait from him. I looked into Edward's eyes and spoke slowly. "If I broke any company rules, let me go. I'll follow protocol. But if it's just your personal liking, as far as I know, you don't hold company shares and you're not on the board. You've got no authority to fire me. If you really want me out, wait for the chairman to say so at next month's annual meeting." Edward looked upset when I hit back. He grabbed my collar and sneered, "All right then, just wait to be humiliated when you leave." I told him that I definitely would be waiting, because maybe it wouldn't be me who has to go. On the day of the annual meeting, the branch's performance was great this year. Even the chairman showed up. Everyone was really serious about it. A few days before, the leadership reminded us not to take any leave that day, so reps from every department turned up. Once everyone was there, Edward brought Ken in. They were laughing and chatting, looking like a happy father and son duo. Colleagues couldn't help but gossip about how much Ken really loved his son. Ken took his seat at the table with Edward beside him and Emily on the other side. Emily greeted Ken but only talked to Edward after that. They were wearing the same color clothes, looking like a perfect match. After the big boss's speech, it was time for the department leaders to talk. They just went on about the company aiming for a brighter future. I was sitting at the back with Mike, munching through a lot of snacks, piling them up on the table. Then Ken took the stage, giving the usual speech to motivate everyone for next year. After he finished, Edward stood up with a grievous look on his face and spoke, "Dad, the company did well because of everyone's hard work, but some bad things happened internally. Since you're here, I want to discuss my solution." Ken smiled warmly, gesturing him to sit. "Sure, but before that, I have an announcement. Everyone knows I put my son in a grassroots position for experience. He took the lead in closing this deal. I'm grateful for everyone who helped him succeed. Let's let him say a few words to wrap up the year's work perfectly. Secretary, please bring him up." The secretary walked down from the stage. When she passed Edward, he stood up, ready to go on stage. But surprisingly, the secretary walked past him, came to me and gestured for me to come up. "Please, sir." Ken looked proudly at me. "Nick, come up by Dad and say a few words." The room seemed to freeze, and I could even hear Emily gasping. I got up, smiled at everyone, and walked on stage. From there, I could clearly see Edward and Emily's faces. Edward was pale, standing there in disbelief. Emily looked troubled, nervously fiddling with the tablecloth. In her complex eyes, I couldn't fathom her emotions or if she felt any regret. But it didn't matter. What happened at the meeting would definitely stir up a storm in the company. Our identities would become the hot topic. But Ken and I weren't planning to clear it up. After my speech, Edward finally snapped out of it and sat down motionless. Ken asked Edward, "What were you going to say?" Edward woke up from his trance and said, "Nothing." After the meeting, he never mentioned what he was going to say, likely because only I knew it was an excuse to get my dad to fire me. Leaving the company, the driver picked me and Ken up. Edward and Emily walked over, appearing dazed. In front of Ken, Edward quickly adjusted and politely said goodbye. "Chairman will leave first." Ken said, "Edward, have someone send this lady back. I have something to discuss with you." Edward sent Emily off, and as she got in the car, she glanced back at me. That look perhaps carried resentment, hope, and a bit of confusion. I pretended not to notice. Ken looked puzzled. "Isn't that Edward's girlfriend? Do you two know each other well?" Our relationship was kept under wraps at the company. Even Ken didn't know. But with his experience, he easily sensed something was off. I smiled. "She's my ex." Ken looked at Edward. "Did you know?" Edward stayed silent. Ken, usually gentle, suddenly turned stern. "Foolish. Edward, you let me down." Edward's eyes reddened. "Dad, shouldn't you tell me what's going on?" Ken snorted. "I told you before, I have a biological son out there. I never thought about abandoning you. The plan was for you and Nick to work together and grow closer. But you pulled off this vile act of taking credit. How can I trust you?" Edward scoffed. "He's your son. So am I not after all these years?" Ken shook his head, disappointed. "Precisely because I see you as my son. I didn't discard you after knowing we aren't blood related. But how do you repay me? I'd rather not have a son like you." In the end, Edward left bitterly with Ken. After the annual meeting, I didn't see Edward at the office. Mike gave me the cold shoulder for a few days, upset I didn't tell him such a big secret. I had no choice but to take him out for a meal. A few drinks softened him, and he forgave me, curious about what went down with Edward. I briefly told him how Edward and I were switched at birth. Mike burped. "Wow, didn't see that coming. Fake and real young masters are right by my side. So, about that thing they framed you for, the harassment, why didn't you defend yourself?" I sighed, feeling a bit helpless. I used to date Emily. If I exposed it, she wouldn't be able to survive in the company anymore. When Mike heard this big news, his eyes practically popped out. "No way. You're something else, man. Not even telling me you had a girlfriend?" "Ex-girlfriend," I chuckled. "Didn't imagine you'd be such a chatterbox." By the next day, our secret relationship and how Edward stole her from me spread all over the company. At least he had some decency not to mention Edward's identity, so those harassment rumors naturally died down. Honestly, I didn't care much about the gossip at work. Ever since my identity was revealed, important tasks were gradually handed over to me. Work consumed my life and kept me too busy to worry about everything else. Just another regular day, I bumped into Edward while he was packing his stuff at the office. He'd lost a lot of weight, looked a bit hollow with dark circles under his eyes and a scar on his forehead. Heard things weren't going well between him and Emily, even got physical, and he's afraid to go home. The moment he saw me, he threw his box on the ground and snapped, "You think now that Dad acknowledged you, you're going to become something special? A barnyard chicken is still just a barnyard chicken. Plus, 20+ years of education means our perspectives will always differ. Dad will eventually want me back." Maybe my dad had pampered him too much over the years, giving him some unfounded confidence. I never considered him my enemy. From Dad's view, he was supposed to be an ally. From mine, he benefited from 20 years of education I never had but still wound up losing to me. An opponent like that just lowers my standards. I shook my head, a faint smile on my lips. "Dad never intended for you to leave. You brag about perspective but can't even see his intentions. Why hasn't he announced your identity? To protect you. Play it smart, stay dutiful, and after I inherit the company, I might just take care of you. But fail to see that, and there might not be a place for you as a fake young master." Edward's face turned various shades between green and white as I spoke. His weak spot, being not the real son, was painfully obvious. We locked eyes for a while, his initial hatred now almost mocking because he seemed to find an angle to attack me. So what if you're real deal? Your girl still ended up in my bed. I shrugged. Do you really care where garbage gets dumped? Why Edward and Emily picked each other is beyond me. Maybe Emily liked his status, or Edward fancied her looks and abilities. I'll say this for her, Emily was capable enough. It's not like I gained nothing from our relationship back then. Picking Emily might have seemed like a brag on Edward's part. But hey, in their own twisted way, they ran towards each other. I patted Edward's shoulder. You got one thing right. Our fates were decided from birth. You and Emily are a better match. I shrugged, then walked away without looking back. 2 weeks later, HR told me Emily quit. I wasn't surprised. She really had no reason to stay. She left with nothing, disappearing once her 1-month notice ended. Soon, a new hire filled her slot, and all that was left of Emily were the whispers. Her years of effort ultimately amounted to nothing more than zero. One day, I came home to find her crouched by the bushes near my place. Her eyes were red as she approached, trying to hold my hand. Nick, I made a mistake. It was all my fault. Can we get back together? I gently pulled my hand away. Emily, you have a boyfriend. Have some respect for yourself. Tears welled up in her eyes immediately. She shook her head. No, Nick, I've broken up with Edward. He's horrible, he even hit me, look. She rolled up her sleeve, showing me the bruises. A year ago, I might have been heartbroken seeing those. But those feelings vanished when she chose Edward over me and broke it off right in my face. I sighed, hearing her stomach growl. After a moment, I said, come on, let's get something to eat. Emily was stunned for a second, then nodded through tears. We went to an old noodle joint on Main Street, and soon she was halfway through her bowl. I barely touched mine, then asked her, remember the first time we ate here? She paused, clearly clueless. I got my answer, flashing a breezy smile. That was after we finished a big job together for the first time. It was late, and this place was all that was open. We both ordered noodles. Emily ate with such enthusiasm, her smile gleaming through the steam. She confidently said, Nick, this is just the beginning. Greater things are ahead of us. I watched her smile, promising myself, Nick, you'll never let her down. Back then, I even pointed at a tall building across the street. Emily, when I can afford it, the first thing I'll do is buy you a house there. Now, the tower still stands, and by some twist of fate, I've gained the ability. But the bright young woman she used to be, she's lost in the mist. I was taken aback by her dazed look. Maybe it's better to forget. What's in the past should stay there. Her tears kept falling. She slammed her chopsticks on the table. Nick, are you really this heartless? You promised back then not to let me down. Now you're the one leaving me. You were acknowledged by your dad. But you didn't tell me. Do I even matter to you? We've come this far, and you're saying you have zero fault? You lied to me first. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been swayed by Edward's little favors. I looked at her tear-stained eyes, and any last bit of pity vanished. You keep saying it's my fault. Have you ever considered, if I weren't Ken's son, was it still wrong of me to resign under your pressure? Is it my fault I got labeled for harassment and rejected in background checks? While you and Edward were all lovey-dovey, I had to abandon everything and start over. Emily, you picked this path yourself. I warned you. You insisted you'd never regret your choice. With that, I shoved the bowl of noodles forward and left the table. After that, I never saw Emily again. Edward didn't perform well later and got kicked out by my dad, who then focused on prepping me as the company's heir. Years down the road, I ran the company, raising it to new heights. Once, while going through cleaning staff applications, I spotted Emily's resume. The photo showed her from college, eyes bright and full of life. My secretary asked, Nick, do you know this applicant? I chuckled, no, just noticed she's an alum and took an extra look. Yesterday's gone and forgotten. The past is just a fleeting memory. Even if the future is just me, it'll still be filled with endless beauty.